And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good day, good morrow, good yesterday, good time zone thing. Anyway, we are here. It's Monday. We are back for more waffles, for more fermented vegetable products, and possibly some bread products as well. But never mind. Welcome one and welcome all to the Monday Sci-Fi Fantasy Stream. Now, I was oddly enough, I was watching Star Trek today, because we tend to watch Star Trek over there. Monday evening is sci-fi evening in the Wagar household. But we weren't watching the original series, which is totally unrelated to what we're talking about now. But there we go. Yes, but we'll get on to that. We'll get on. Now, in honor of the day, you can see I'm wearing my. You can just about make that out. There we go. My Star Trek pin hat, and it's live, Jim. But as we know, it is in fact Captain Kirk's. Well, not Captain Kirk's because he's not born yet, is he? But William Shatner, bless him. William Shatner's 90th birthday. He's probably old. So happy birthday, Jim. So first of all, yes, happy birthday, William Shatner. Many happy returns. So what's that make? So it's 2021. When is that? That's 1931. Is that right? It must be 1931. Congratulations, William Shatner. Having a very happy birthday indeed. He's the only one left, of course, of the big three, isn't he? And many of them actually, thinking about it. So Scotty, I think. Who was Scotty played by? I should know. Jim Doohan? James Doohan. He was the first one to go. I remember when Scotty died. And then I think it was DeForest Kelley, who was Dr. McCoy, of course. I think he was the next one. Then Spock, Leonard Nimoy, wasn't. There we go. James Doohan. Well done, chat. He was a little bit more recent. So Captain Kirk is kind of the last one of the big main characters, the top characters left, isn't he? I mean, I assume that Sulu, Chekhov, Uhura are still going. I don't know who else is out of the original cast is still going. George Takei and Walter Koenig still going, and Nichelle Nichols is still good. That's good. So they must be pretty old as well by now. James Doohan did have some of his ashes scattered in space, which is very, very cool. I did ask my family if I could have my ashes scattered in space, and I suspect the cost may be a bit prohibitive. So I may have to forego that. So what I think I might do, I mean, this is already going into slightly morbid territory, of course. What do you want done when you're dead? I think I'd quite like my ashes scattered on a dark, starlit evening. That's probably about the best I can do. So I think I might get that done. Costs are coming down, so you never know. Maybe by the time I snuff it. I mean, it's got to be relatively. I mean, I'm not trying to be like super morbid already, but it can't be that far away, can it? Relatively. I mean, let's say 30, 40 years ish. 30, 40, 50 years. In 50 years' time, it's unlikely that I will be sitting here streaming to you guys. And what do I want done? What I want to do is I want to be incinerated. I want to have my remains cast aloft. It's a very strange thing, isn't it? If they say yes, they're lying. Yeah, I'd like to be uploaded into a supercomputer. I mean, that would be quite simple for me, wouldn't it? I mean, you just have to sit in front of a screen. And I mean, maybe somebody, you could probably do it now. Actually, they could just record this stream and then kind of. If all I need to do is just move my head around a little bit, and then they can make an animated version of me, sort of a digital artwork style, a bit like they did with Grand Moff Tarkin on there. And you could have me forever. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Even if I wasn't launched into orbit, actually that would be quite cool. I wouldn't mind being a meteor shower. You could launch me into a slightly cheaper orbit. Don't put me up there permanently. Just put me up so then I come back down again in a big, big fireball and alarm people in the middle of the night. Glenn says, I want to be mummified. I don't fancy that, because you'll end up in a museum, Glenn. That's the problem. And then lots and lots of bored school children will have to write really, really bad essays about you. That's not a good way to live out your entire future existence. No, I don't fancy being mummified. And you don't look good when you. I mean, let's be honest. You don't look good when you've been mummified, do you? Drew Headroom, yes. That could just be a low resolution version of me. That'd be great. I mean, I could probably tweak the resolution down and achieve that effect right now. But there we go. Is Bill the Shatner going to outlast me? Well, I think it's fairly unlikely. But the wood chipper option. I had to make pretty sure I'm dead first. Actually, I think. Oh, so yeah, Dark Star, of course. We haven't talked about Dark Star much. Are we surfing into the atmosphere at the end? Yeah, that's quite good. See how far we can get into space with a backup. Well, I suppose the lighter you make me. I think wasn't it Clyde Tombaugh, the chap who chap who discovered Pluto? Didn't they send a very small amount of him on the New Horizons? Was it that one, or was there one going to the moon? I can't remember. There was some space probe where they put a gram or something of his remains and sent it up into space. I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, but there's not a great. To be honest, if you're looking at it from a kind of chemical perspective, when you've been incinerated, there isn't a great deal left of you, is there? Because I mean, all the remaining atoms of you, or the molecules of you, have been chemically converted into something else. Is that just ash, or is that actually you? I'm not quite sure. Clyde Tombaugh was on New Horizons. There we go. I knew it was something like, I vaguely remember that. So I actually got my name on that ship as well. So I have got a little bit of immortality. The only proviso being that the aliens who discover the New Horizons probe will have to have a CD-ROM reader, because my name is digitally encoded, along with many thousands of others, on a CD-ROM that's affixed to the New Horizons probe. So, assuming the New Horizons probe survives through space for quite a long time, I don't know what the life expectancy of a CD-ROM is in the depths of space, but it's probably more than a human lifetime, I would hope. Possibly several thousand, maybe tens of thousands of years. So, with a bit of luck, the name Drew Wager will exist, travelling through the universe for many, many thousands of years after I have ceased to be. So that gives me some small shred of comfort. It's not quite immortality. Silver Tea was, I don't think even I have a CD-ROM reader. So it's a little bit far-fetched to think that in some distant future that some aliens go, oh look, a CD-ROM, stick it in their CD-ROM reader and go, wow, look, Drew Wager is on this spaceship. So who knows? It was quite a nice idea. So it's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? Because I think we've I don't want to veer into existentialism again, because we go there too often on these streams. What is the meaning of life? Why are we all going to die horribly and be lonely throughout the rest of eternity? No, but it's kind of like when you do come to the end of your existence as a corporeal being, we have these strange rituals, don't we? I mean, it goes back into ancient times, obviously, and we've already talked about mummification to try and preserve you for the afterlife. Or in the case of more modern things, some people want to be buried, some people want to be effectively incinerated, some people want to be shot into space. MX-5s live forever, yeah. Yes, they do. They just but they do slowly rust, unfortunately. But I mean, you always got to kind of try and be ecologically conscious nowadays, because burial does take up quite a bit of space. And maybe being incinerated is more environmentally friendly, although you're probably doing quite a lot of carbon dioxide to get incinerated, aren't you? So I don't know if that's good or not. I quite fancy. I mean, what I wouldn't mind, actually, to be honest, if there was space. I don't know if it's a bit weird, actually, but I wouldn't mind being buried and somebody planting a tree on top of me, and then the sort of tree could use my my organics, shall we say, to kind of turn itself into new life. That sort of does appeal to me. But then you'd have people. That tree there. That's Dru. If you listen closely, you can still hear him laughing about something. This tree will be not haunted in a nasty way, but in the middle of the night you'll just hear this strange chuckling sound in the middle of the forest. Just leave me where I drop. Yeah, but that's a bit unhygienic, isn't it? Because you can't just leave you where you. I mean, if you're in the middle of Tesco's, JR99 here, that's not going to be practical, is it? Glenn wants to be launched into a photon torpedo to a terraformed planet. Ah, yes. Well, that may work. You're going to have to be very, very clear with the directions on the revival process there, I think. Don't leave it to some sort of vague mind control prank with a handy doctor who just happens to be nearby. Do it properly, Glenn, with instructions, okay? Mushrooms, the Expanse has the right idea with the mushrooms. Yes, that's recycling to its ultimate extreme. Maybe that's a good idea. It's a scarecrow. Yuck. Ah dear. Morbid things about what we should do with each other's bodies when we die. I don't know. I suppose some people of course consider that they are going into an afterlife, which probably will have a bearing on whether or not you want anything particular done. I had to say goodbye to my stepfather earlier this year. Some of you will know, you may have spotted it on Facebook, and he was 91. He had a good innings, and he died. And he wasn't particularly religious at all. He wanted to be. He said, "Don't spend too much money on the funeral." He said, "What's the point?" He was a very practical man, and he'd given all these directions. I had huge respect for him. He was a very successful businessman, actually. He was very, very, very organised, and he'd given very specific directions as to how his sort of funeral service was to go, and who was to sit where and on which side, and what music was to be played, and where it was supposed to be, and what the type of coffee was. And oddly enough, I saw his instructions, and it said at the top, and it's like venue in Amersham, directions for the conduct of said ceremony, time, date, and he had basically put semicolon to be confirmed. The only detail of his funeral he hadn't planned was the precise date and time, and just in true businessman fashion, he just left it as TBC. So I don't know, but so he was pretty kind of laid back and nonchalant about it. So I don't know. Maybe my thoughts on it will change as I get older, but I don't know. We won't ever die, Drew. We're all digital NPCs watching Australia. Yes, I suppose that's true. You guys could well just be digital NPCs. Maybe I am as well, because as far as you're concerned, I'm just a chocolatey collection of pixels on your screen at a relatively high resolution, but not super resolution. But there we go. Never mind. What do you want to do when you die? I should leave it up to you, but there we go. Sorry you're late. That's the topic. Yes, the late topic. Dear. But it's a funny thing, isn't it, to contemplate your non-existence. It's funny actually, because if you think about it the other way around, I don't contemplate my non-existence prior to my life very much. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, things happened before 1970. Now, I find this particularly hard to believe, because I wasn't there, so how could it possibly be true? But apparently they did. There's all sorts of evidence to suggest that there were events that happened in the world, in fact in the universe, before I was born. So, the prevailing theory at the moment is that things have been happening for an awfully long time before I became me. And the extension of that hypothesis is that there will be events and happenings and general continuings on of corporeal existence long after I have ceased to be as well. So I appear to occupy a very small period of time between an eternity of stuff that's already happened and an eternity of stuff that is also about to happen. of which I will not partake in the slightest. So I don't know. Can I do the max? Can I do the? No, I'm going to have to research the max headroom off. I probably can, but I think I can remember it accurately at the moment. Yeah, preposterous, because nothing happened before the late 1980s, says Joe 1988. Oh, well, I may disagree with you there. Then there's definitely things that happened in the early 1980s. I can't remember much about the late 1980s because, of course, I was at universities as a student in my first year. Therefore, I was often drunk. So that may explain some strange happenings in those eras, because I can't remember what was going on. But it's odd, isn't it? You know, on a semi-serious note, to consider that you didn't exist for how long has the universe been around? 4-point-something billion years. You didn't exist for the vast majority of that as a thinking individual, and obviously with all the future time that's available, you won't exist then either as a thinking individual. So who am I to exist within this relatively short time period of maybe, I don't know, 70 to 90, 100 years? Yeah, assuming average life. It's a very curious thing to kind of try and think about. I thought you were going to sum up the 80s again there. Been following my Twitch and my Twitter jokes. Actually, my son told me that one, which I thought it was quite funny. So, hence it ended up on Twitter. Apparently, Alan says if you can remember the 60s, you weren't really there. I've heard that one a few times, which is quite funny. But anyway, my friends, there we are. We are here. We still exist at this point in time. Okay, and we should celebrate the fact that we do exist. Of course, somebody else who also exists, of course, is the wonderful William Shatner, whose birthday is today. Happy 90th birthday to William Shatner, better known, of course, as Captain James Tiberius Kirk of the USS Enterprise. No bloody A, B, C, D, or E, or any of the other letters, just the original one. And so for this stream, we've been talking fantasy for the last few weeks. So let's talk a bit of science fiction. Actually, science fiction and Star Trek don't all that often overlap. I mean, obviously, it's a spaceship travelling through space and doing sciencey stuff quite a lot of the time. So, yeah, in that respect, science fiction and Star Trek do overlap. But Star Trek has always been. I think it's Gene Roddenberry, when he designed it back in the 60s, I assume. It's he called it Wagon Train to the Stars. Now, I don't actually know what Wagon Train is, but I'm sort of assuming it's a sort of Western show. So maybe some of the Americans on the stream who are of a certain era can advise me, because I don't think I've ever seen Wagon Train. I'm assuming it's a TV show. Shatner's doing a live stream, is it? I might have to watch that. That should be quite good. Yeah, actually, Glenn, you make a very good point. How did I get chosen to live between the time that all exploration on the Earth is basically done and we can't explore? We are sort of stuck. That's quite profound and quite sad, isn't it? Yeah, that there's nothing really left to explore on the Earth in terms of places that nobody else has ever been. But we don't yet have the technology to go anywhere else. You know, we're sort of stuck in that intervening time, and who knows when we're able to get to Mars or even out of the solar system. It's interesting. Yeah, I kind of feel for you there. I feel the same sort of thing. So anyway, so Glenn says wagon trains were groups of settlers who travelled across the country to settle in the West. Okay, so it was a 1957 to 1965 Western show. So apparently Gene Roddenberry pitched it to the TV execs, or whatever these people are, that it was wagon train but in space. So it's like going exploring into the Wild West but in space, which is, I suppose it's quite good. And I must admit, I don't know about you guys, because I grew up. I mean, 1970, I was born after Star Trek, the original series, had finished transmitting. I never saw Star Trek, the original series, when it was actually on. I only saw it effectively on reruns by the time it came to the UK. But I remember it's one of the earliest TV shows I can remember watching. And I would watch it with my dad because, he was sort of a bit into space and stuff. He liked electronics and photography. And, Star Trek was at least passable as far as he was concerned. And I remember watching, and I remember that, the intro sequence. I mean, it looks impossibly twee now compared to everything else we've experienced over the years. But that, those original notes, the do, 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 that bit. Sorry for the not very good rendition of the Star Trek theme tune. But I don't know. Even now, okay, if I watch the original intro sequence, you get that. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. This 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life forms, and boldly go where no man has gone before. It still gets me right in the what's going to happen in this week's episode? You know, and I know I've seen every single episode of the original series. I know all of them kind of mostly by heart, but it still gets me. It still gets me. It's like, you know, what's going to happen to the Enterprise this week? It's like a theremin, yeah. And it's just, I don't know, they captured something about, at least for me, the immensity of space. The fact that here's a, and you know, I like the idea the Enterprise was quite a, you know, it was a spaceship. Okay, I mean, it's got a silly design, you know, really. I mean, I've got one actually. Where is it? Let me go get it. There we go. Here it is. It might as well have it as a useful. This is quite a nice model actually. I was given this one several years ago. It's slightly damaged, but not too bad. I think it got dropped before I got it. But there we go. Look, I could probably do the intro sequence. These voyages of the Starship Enterprise. And then we have to do that. Hang on, we've got to do the. It's got to be about. No, it's going to be this. It's got to be this side. There we go. And. Whoosh. There we go. See, that looks better than the original, doesn't it? Ah, dear. So, you know, I mean, I love it. I love it, and I kind of look at. What part of me is like, that's exactly what a 24th century spaceship should look like. Or I don't know. Is it the 24th, 23rd? I can't remember. Is it the 20? I can't. Yeah, 22nd. She looks quite realistic. Apart from my hand, of course. I should get a black glove or a green glove, maybe. I have to hang on. I can do that. Hang on. I'm going to hide behind the green. See if I can make this work. Yeah, hang on. Here we go. I'm not sure that was successful. That was quite. Actually, it's not too bad, is it? I just need a stick. Actually, hang on. Which way is the screen? No, it's sort of fly that way. That we could sort of fly away. Look, then the ship's sort of flying into the depths of the rendered background. There, maybe. I can still see my hand. Can you really? I need to fall. I'm gonna have to try that. I've got some other spaceship models. I should do a TV show, shouldn't I? Yeah, so there we go. Anyway, so I have this model, and this is actually a proper model in the sense that it's actually the ship to scale. And you know, it's I don't know. I hear quite a few different things about the model of the Enterprise and how it was designed, because I've heard. It's lost the plot a long time ago. Yes, imagine getting DMCA'd for hand puppetry. I need a stick and a thing. I'll work on that. The special effects budget is a green stick. That would work. That probably would work actually. I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna get a green stick for next week. We can do it. But anyway, so you know, whenever I see this ship, it's just iconic in the sense that I just oh wow, look at the Enterprise, isn't it amazing? And of course, and I've heard, and maybe people who can who know a little bit more about Star Trek, because I'm a big fan, but I'm not all that knowledgeable about Star Trek. Is that it was designed like this to have a saucer section, i.e. this bit where the crew are, and most of the stuff takes place in kind of this habitable area, because everybody in the 60s assumed that a spaceship needed to be a flying saucer. And most of the stuff, you know, if you think about Forbidden Planet, that was a flying saucer. flying saucers were what spaceships were. So I've heard, and this may not be accurate, that the reason the Enterprise has a dish, i.e. as a saucer section like this, is because it's got to have a saucer, because it's a spaceship. So you put a saucer on it. Now I don't know if that's true or not. And then they basically, it can't just be a saucer. Let's add some other bits into it. And then it kind of the whole idea with the warp nacelles and everything else kind of came on from that. I don't know if that's true or not, but it kind of sort of makes sense. And but of course, from a physics point of view, this doesn't really work, does it? Because even if you assume, and on this model, I'm assuming at the back here, there we go, in sort of here, these are supposed to be the impulse engines, which, as I understand it, is the sort of real actual thrust of the ship, and the warp engines don't actually provide any thrust. They just make the warp field. They're not sort of thrust elements, because of course if those were thrust elements, then the ship would immediately go into a spin. But even positioned there, I'm not sure if that's a great place for the engines to be. Maybe because that's not actually, at least not on this model. It's not a centre of gravity or a centre of mass. So that doesn't quite work. So, and as many people have pointed out, and in fact in the recent Star Trek films, they showed that having a really spindly, connecting pieces to your spaceship, i.e., these struts that hold up the warp engines, and this very, very thin neck, which I think somebody worked out what the scale of that neck was, because this ship isn't all that big. It's about 300 meters long, so that makes the neck here only, I think, about 20 meters across, which isn't all that much. And so any attacking vessel could do far worse on an attack strategy than specifically targeting the neck. And on most of the Enterprises, the warp core runs through the neck, which seems to be quite a weak point in the design of the ship. And putting the bridge on top, as in this model, with a sort of what I suppose is a glass dome. It's kind of like a big sign saying "Shoot us here." So there are some tactical strangenesses to the design of the Enterprise, which I don't think they thought that. But it's still, to me, it's like that's what a spaceship actually looks like. It is a wonderful thing, and it always reminds me of that whole boldly going, no one's gone before thing that Star Trek's all about, which is fabulous. Anyway, so that's my little model of the Enterprise, and it's the only one that really does it for me. I suppose I'm fond of the Enterprise D because I quite like Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I quite like the design of the refit version of this, which they used in many of the movies, the motion picture. But none of them give me an emotional tug like this one. This is the one that does. It's I know, I suppose it's like a classic old ship, but this is the only one that gives me a kind of emotional connection to Star Trek. When I see this ship, it's like, well, that's the proper Enterprise. All the others are just pretenders to the throne. So, but it's and so this model is rather nice. It's got bits and pieces of decoration on it and the registry numbers. The nacelles don't light up, alas, but other than that, it's quite good. So, anyways. That's the Enterprise, a model therein, but and the E. Yeah, see, I just love the original one. I just love the original one. Now there are problems obviously with the design of the Enterprise, but we can forgive it that. And for a 60s design, the inside of the Enterprise, I mean, it dates itself a lot more because it's all lights and spinny whirly things almost everywhere. And even from a young age, I remember thinking Spock sitting at his console, surrounded by loads of flashing lights, looked incredibly cool to the eyes of a 6-7-year-old when I was watching Star Trek. But I do remember thinking, how does he actually work out what the computer's telling him? Because all there are lots of lights that switch on and off. What does that actually mean? I mean, it's nothing like any of the computers I've seen. So if a yellow light keeps pulsing on and off, what does that actually mean? As far as I could tell on the Enterprise bridge, there are no labels to anything. All the controls are unlabeled. So you've no idea what they do. So either you have to be intimately familiar with the controls, despite the fact there are no labels to them. And there aren't any kind of screens per se. I suppose there are sometimes, aren't there? Because there's the sort of overhead monitor things that occasionally show stuff, but not computers that you would recognise. So obviously, either people in the 23rd century were incredibly smart at reading flashing lights, or there was something else going on. And the things that they did get right. I mean, Spock did have that blue thing, didn't he? We never saw what was inside the blue thing, but he had like a binnacle thing, didn't he, that he would look into, and there was a focusing dial on the side where he could make fine adjustments to whatever it was he was looking at, which always seemed to be, I don't know, some sort of scanner, and scanners in Star Trek are an interesting thing, of course, fast forward into the Next Generation, everything's gone touchscreen. Which is oddly enough about where we are with cars now, isn't it? If you've noticed any modern cars, everything's gone touchscreen. Now, I must admit, I don't like it very much. I like switches, which is probably why I like the original Enterprise over the D one. Maybe it's a microfiche reader. Well, sometimes when they did the library computers, didn't they? They had computers. And the computer would act a bit like a microfiche, which was quite funny. But they did have some quite good things. Do you remember that Spock had the little cartridges he would slide in and out of the... Of the computer? They looked a little bit like really, really large SD cards. Yeah, those, and they were called tapes, but obviously they weren't tapes. They were just little squares of plastic. But they were kind of an idea of solid state storage, which I think is pretty advanced for the 60s. The ships just flew themselves. The flashing lights were just light shows to soothe the crew. So so some of the later ships had better designs, didn't they? I mean, Star Trek had established it's kind of, you need 2 warp engines to kind of go anywhere. Though some ships had just 1, and some ships had 3, and a few of them had 4, but 2 seemed to be the magic number for warp drive. The Enterprise E does look quite cool. It's a bit more kind of looks more like a liner really than a starship, but you've got much more bigger guns and all that kind of good stuff. In a car you have to look at the touchscreen, but you can feel for it. Yeah, see now, Alan, I tend to agree with you that touchscreens are all very... I don't mind touchscreens where they're primarily for displaying information, and maybe I want a little bit of customization. But for continual use, I think that's a really, really bad design direction that we're going down. Give me proper switches and toggles that I can switch on and off. I definitely much prefer that. But I have great fond. Yay! Are we there? Well, that was fun. I had a local router. It wasn't actually the internet. It was my local router conked out for reasons that were not entirely clear. So I've gone to auxiliary power. If there was a problem with the dilithium crystal storage array, I have switched to auxiliary power, and we're now back. I don't know what that was all about. Core content creator. We're not going there tonight. Anyway, we're back. Apologies for the outage there. So I've got a supplementary. It's not really a router, it's a switch down here near my feet, and it just decided to die for no obvious reason. So I've had to reboot it. But the internet was fine, so it wasn't the internet today. But there we go. But never mind. Anyway, so where was I? We were talking about Star Trek, Lasted Romulans. So I think what I was saying was Star Trek is one of those shows that it's one of the earliest TV shows I can actually ever remember watching, other than kind of preschool sort of stuff. And there were some great cartoons in the 80s, as we've definitely discussed in the time. But Star Trek I remember from the 70s, and my dad sort of watched it with me because some of the bits were. I mean, believe it or not, to a 7-year-old in the 70s, some of the original Star Trek was actually quite scary. I remember being, there's that. What was the creature that was in the mines of one of the sites. It was the Horta, that was it, the silicon-based life form, and it would rove around the passengers and occasionally kill people, wouldn't it? Before they figured out what was going on and why it was doing what it was doing. And as a 7-year-old watching that, that's pretty scary stuff. So I think my dad sort of watched it with me. No kill eye, that was right. No kill eye. What does that mean? Apologies that we had a slight outage there. That was down to the gremlins under my desk, or one of my routers crashed. I remember being a bit scared by some of the episodes, but I do remember very, very clearly being so excited to watch Star Trek each week, because it was all fresh and new then. I hadn't seen anything, and I've said before that I was, as a kid, I was very much into space, and Star Trek kind of grew with me, because in the 70s it was just mostly the Enterprise, and the fact that it was in space and it was a spaceship and it was going places and there were aliens to see and things, and that's about all I got out of it as a kid, and that was enough when I was really, really young. And it wasn't until a bit earlier, probably into the early 80s, so as I was just beginning to enter my teenage years, I started noticing more stuff about Star Trek. I started realising that it was not just a show about a spaceship. And so I suppose my first love from Star Trek is the Enterprise, hence the model that we've already talked about. But my first love, the sort of bits I began to notice is the interplay between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Here were the guys. They weren't just heroes on the ship, in sort of Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon style, but they were solving problems by working together. And sometimes it would be Spock who fixed the problem, and sometimes it would be Kirk, and sometimes it would be McCoy, and sometimes it would be Scotty, and sometimes it's this concept of teamwork. A really good idea. Each person's got different strengths and weaknesses, and all that sort of stuff. And I started getting that out of Star Trek. I was very, very taken with Mr. Spock from a very, very young age, because I saw in Mr. Spock, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people about Star Trek who remember it from a young age, is that Mr. Spock was just, he was just so awesome, because he was a guy who was, a complete fish out of water. With all the rest of the humans, he was the only, he was half Vulcan, wasn't he? He was the only alien on the spaceship. And he had his pointed ears and ostensibly green blood, though he did seem to have red lips for a lot of the season, which is a bit weird. And a Russian, of course, yes, a Russian on the. Well, Chekhov seemed to just be. He kind of was the kid that they brought along for laughs, certainly early on, didn't he? And Sulu seemed to take him under his wing and say, "Hey, you just got to calm down a bit, Chekhov, and you'll be fine." And those two seemed to be rather like brothers on the ship. I remember being very taken with Mr. Spock, because he was a fish out of water. He's the guy with no emotions. He's obviously is showing emotions quite a lot of the time, but he's kind of dispassionate sort of logic. I aspired to be Mr. Spock when I was growing up. I would love to have been, that emotionless. I perceived that as a great strength when I was growing up. So I could definitely be Mr. I even learned to do the eyebrow. I practiced. I can still do it now. I practiced in front of the mirror for many, many months to get the eyebrow. So now I can actually do it. I'm going to check this out. I can actually do Mr. Spock. Here we go. So it took me a long time to do that, and I can still do it. And that is Star Trek. Star Trek made me do that. Mr. Spock made me do that. Well, not made me do it, but you know what I mean. So I learned how to raise an eyebrow, because I thought, what a cool thing to do. Just, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything. You just... It's just brilliant. I think it's one of the best bits of kind of character differentiation that you can do. It was just like, Spock just has to literally sit there and go. Everyone gets what he means. And the little catchphrase is fascinating, and then McCoy coming back with, "Don't say it's fast. Do me a favour, Spock. Don't say it's fascinating." And Spock goes, "But it is interesting." The Vulcan salute. Yes, I could do that as well. Look, there we go. So there we go. There's the Vulcan salute. I could do that. I practiced that as well. But Leonard Nimoy really did bring a lot to Spock. Now I really did. Spock to me was a character who, I really wanted to be like, because I saw in Spock I suppose a sort of, I could be like Spock if I survived school. We've talked about how bad school was in the 80s, and it was something that you had to survive. There were bullies, and there was hard work, and there was just all that kind of rubbish in school, and it wasn't a pleasant environment. But Mr. Spock was sort of like, I reckon I could be Mr. Spock if I get out of here. I'll have all those things, and then the Vulcan neck pinch and all those sort of things. And it sort of showed me, I suppose Spock was the first time I thought, now there's a scientist working in space who and he clearly is good at science. He likes science. He's respected for being sciencey and nerdy and geeky. And there's I had no respect when I was at school for being sciencey and nerdy and geeky. So I figured, one day there'll be an environment in which I can exist where, science and geeks and nerds and clever people who like science can exist and be respected for who they are. We should talk about Captain Kirk, shouldn't we? But Spock was actually the one who made an impression on me. He was the one I aspired to be. Now Kirk, I had a great deal of respect for, because Kirk is, as a young man, I wish Kirk would stop kissing all the girls and get on with the show. He did seem to have an annoying predilection for wasting time kissing the girls while the Enterprise needed saving. But the thing I always liked about Kirk, you can take the mickey out of Captain Kirk a lot, with his big gaps in sentences which just don't ever seem to stop, Jim. All that sort of stuff, and rolling around and ripping his t-shirt and all those kind of things. But that's all part of the fun of the show. The thing I liked most about Kirk, actually, really, in kind of hindsight, was that he was a leader. That the other guys, there was an unspoken sort of loyalty that they had towards him in the show. And I know that's not quite the same with William Shatner outside the show, but Kirk, these guys, Spock was. I could instantly see Spock was cleverer than Kirk. Spock was smarter than Kirk. Spock was clearly stronger than Kirk. Because he's a Vulcan, all those sort of things. McCoy was slightly older, a bit cantankerous, knew his stuff in the medical world, but and Scotty was just in love with his ship. He just was an engineer through and through. But they all looked to Kirk to, fix. He was the one that brought them all together and got the best out of them all. So. So all that sort of stuff, and Kirk, Glenn's already mentioned it. Lucky Luigi. Kirk certainly taught me to appreciate green women. Yes, I remember the green women stuff. Now, as a young lad, I didn't really notice the green women other than that they were green. That was the thing that stuck in my mind. I didn't notice certain other attributes until I was somewhat older. Kirk certainly had a bit, but he could. What I liked about Kirk is twofold. One, he could use logic to to defeat a computer, which I thought was a remarkable thing. That whole. Quite a few examples of Kirk defeating a computer by logic, wasn't it? Where he says, "Consider this computer. I never lie," and the computer would go, "Working." And then he would say something like, "I am lying." Now, was that Spock who said that? I can't remember. No. Kirk wrestled the ultimate computer into death, didn't he? He said, "What are the crimes for? Have you committed murder? Yes, this unit has committed murder." And then, what's the crime for murder? Death. This unit must therefore die, and so it commits suicide. Kirk was quite good at that, wasn't he? He was always getting computers caught in logic circuits. Of course, a modern computer would simply throw an exception and go and just reboot and restart. So it wouldn't work. But it was quite an interesting idea that you could short circuit a computer. But Kirk, my favourite thing about Kirk was not so much the logic with the computers, but the fact that he could give a good speech, and people would change their minds and go, "You know what, Captain? Yes, you're right." So there was this one episode that I really quite like, which is, I think, where I can't remember what the setup is, but where the Klingons basically end up on the Enterprise, and there's this sort of, they end up in a sword battle with the crew of the Enterprise. I can't remember exactly what was going on. Day of the Dove is coming back out of my memory uncertainly. Anyway, the Klingons and the Federation people are stuck aboard the Enterprise, and they're having this fight. And Kirk has to do this, basically just does this speech to the Klingons. And then, at the height of the battle, they're all swinging swords and killing each other. And then basically Kirk does this speech. And the Klingons basically go, you know what, Kirk? You're right. And that happens a lot with the original series. Day of the Dove is correct, says Kelly, I guess. There we are. My memory was correct. Kirk does a good speech. And the bad guys go, you know what? I recognise that I've been wrong, and there's a better way, and thank you for pointing it out to me, Captain Kirk. I'm glad you came to me with the Enterprise, gave me a little pep talk, and now I'm going to mend my ways and everything will be good. And then Kirk and Spock and McCoy would exchange some joke on the bridge of the Enterprise, and the ship would warp out of orbit onto the next episode. And I remember thinking in the 80s when I was at school, my problem is that I haven't got the Captain Kirk speech down right yet. So when there's a problem at school, all I need to do is say the right things and everything will be okay. I just need to go, well, you guys, what you need to do, needless to say, that approach didn't work. So I have been slowly over the years disabused of my notion that a good speech can turn people around, because I've never seen it work well in real life. So there's some magical potency to Captain Kirk's voice in the 22nd century. I fear that the appealing to everybody's better nature doesn't usually work. But there we go. But I did like Kirk, and of course he was very, by my standards today, he was very young, wasn't he? I think he was 30. How old was he when he played Kirk? How old was Kirk supposed to be on the Enterprise? He was only in his 30s, wasn't he? Which is, of course, feels to me like you gave a 30-year-old a warp-powered starship and let them off around the galaxy. Are you mad? Have you met any 30-year-olds? So he was actually quite young when he was commanding this starship, and I think thinking about it now, I don't know how old Kirk was supposed to be when he was on the Enterprise, but I'm getting sort of 33, 34, 35 ish. I mean, if William Shatner was born in 1931, and Star Trek went out in 1966, I think he would have been 33, 34, 35 when it was. So that's how old he appeared to be. Now, whether Kirk was really 33, but he kind of, let's say he was 35. There's no way I would have wanted to be. I mean, actually, the childhood part of me said, yes, let me be the captain of the Enterprise. But when I was 35, not sure I'd be ready for the responsibility of a warp-powered starship with hundreds of lives on board. So I don't know. It strikes me as slightly odd. I think I'd want to be more kind of Captain Picardy. And the scary thing is now that I think am older than Patrick Stewart was when he took command of the Enterprise. So I'm getting on a bit, that's a bit weird. Captain Kirk did not laugh as much as me. You obviously got up the ranks fairly quickly in Starfleet to kind of get on board the Enterprise. But Star Trek, from a taking this back to a kind of writing thing, Star Trek is very, obviously it's because it's episodic. You don't tend to have very much in the way of season-spanning stories. There's a little bit of that, but not a vast amount. Most stuff had to be resolved in the episode, and there was always a bit, you could see that as a writer now I can see the scene beats. There's the crisis at the beginning, which is kind of keep watching the TV show. Then there's the sort of explanation of the problem in the first 10 minutes. Then there's the sort of intermediate bit where they're fishing around trying to find the answers, and then there's the resolution in the last 10 minutes with a bit of a twist depending on what's going on. And then there'll always be a little bonhomie bit in the last 30 seconds where they all sort of sit on the bridge and have a little laugh before the next episode. Kirk's personality in the J.J. Abrams movies is more in line with the 30-year-old. Can confirm. I'm in my 30s, says Joe. Yeah, so he's a bit more gung-ho, isn't he? Yeah. But a lot of the things Star Trek did get right. The handheld communicators. I mean, they're not like mobile phones. They talk into them, but some people still do that. They wander around with their phones in that fashion. The idea of having a personal communicator was spot on. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. The storytelling, actually, some of the stories in Star Trek are very, very good. Some of them are diabolically bad, of course, as well. But and I think my favourite episode of Star Trek, the original series, is the Guardian on the Edge of Forever, which I think is written by Harlan Ellison, who is an independent sci-fi writer anyway, where the Enterprise encounters this sort of time gate, and McCoy accidentally goes back in time and changes the past, and then Kirk and Spock have to go back in time and fix it. Brilliant episode. And Star Trek was able to embrace things like time travel, and oddly enough, they always end up back in an era which is similar to the era the thing was filmed in. It's most peculiar. It's almost as if someone was thinking, tell you what, we'll go back to a time where, about now, so the sets are cheap. So they did dabble with time travel. They did dabble with, all sorts of interesting kind of social issues. They tried racism. They tried, class. They tried all sorts of issues, which I think was quite good. It was clearly a storytelling vehicle that Gene Roddenberry was using. So all those kind of things were good. But the interplay between the characters was also a strong point of Star Trek. The characters you did care about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and they were distinct and they were different, and they would bring different things to the to the thing. And it sort of started to fade out by season 3, didn't it? I think most of the best episodes had gone by that point. Just oddly enough, just as the special effects were beginning to improve a little bit. And Joan Collins, so there's quite a number of fairly famous actors and actresses in Star Trek who weren't all that famous at the time. So Joan Collins, of course, is not somebody you necessarily think associate with Star Trek, but she was excellent as Edith Keeler in Star Trek, wasn't she? A lot of people in Star Trek were doing that kind of thing. So, and I think what I do like about Star Trek, and it's not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but it's pretty good, is the consistency and the sort of sciencey stuff behind the scenes that's going on. So you have the warp drive, which is an explanation for how to cross space, in a reasonable time frame. The transporter is obviously a mechanism to get the characters down to the action without needing lots of expensive rocket ship stuff, which, but it's a clever image and someone's thought about it. And in the Next Generation, you get a bit more about it, like Heisenberg compensators and things like this, and pattern buffers and things like that. So they've at least thought about the scientific, actually, and I appreciate the effort. And the fact that you've got an antimatter warp reactor, which is sort of, I suppose, catalysed, I assume, by dilithium crystals, which obviously don't really exist. But so there's quite a lot of good stuff in there. But the characters are things that nowadays I tend to recall. Captain Kirk, Spock, McCoy, in fact, the entire bridge crew really, and a few of the secondary characters are very memorable. Very, very memorable indeed. Trek has always had an odd relationship with scientific accuracy, and a lot of technologies that have come out of Star Trek. There are. I don't remember that Dead Star one, the DS9. DS9 is one that sort of passed me by, but I haven't really. I don't think I've watched the whole of DS9. Because I always kind of, it's sort of boldly staying put where no one stayed put before. It didn't really appeal to me so much. I need to give it a watch because I haven't watched it all the way through. Star Trek did get weird at times. There was quite a lot of debunking old myths as well, wasn't there? With like the god Apollo that they encountered and the green hand that grasped it. So I can do that one. Look, there we go. There's the hand grasping the Enterprise. You can't escape. I've got you in my glove. So there was some slightly wacky episodes of that going on. there was the idea of accidentally time traveling because you went too fast towards the sun and all those kind of things. So dilithium crystals are interesting. I don't know if they were related to lithium, because lithium is obviously a real thing, but Spock's brain, that was appalling. So that was sort of planet of the because wasn't it? I'm trying to remember the plot of Spock's brain now. Wasn't it a planet where, for some strange reason, the women were in charge, but they needed a brain for some reason. They decided to pinch Spock's brain for some reason. I can't remember what that was all about. But yeah, very odd episode. A very odd episode. The impact at certainly a personal level for me of Star Trek is immense. The idea of having a ship that is pretty good. What I liked about Star Trek is that the Enterprise and the Federation were presented as quite advanced. Okay, we've talked a bit about some of the problems with that. They seem to have done away with money, and they seem to have done away with all concepts of an economy. So you kind of wonder how they get anything done. But we work to better ourselves. But why? That bit still doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. But maybe it will. Maybe we'll get there. But the thing I liked about Star Trek was that we weren't, in quite a lot of science fiction, that humanity is always portrayed at the bottom. We're the least technological, we're the backward civilization. The aliens are always way more advanced than us. Whereas in Star Trek, quite a lot of the time we would encounter alien civilizations that weren't as advanced as we were. They would have crappy ships where we'd have a decent one, or their civilization on the planet would be backward compared to us, and they would look at us and go, "Oh, look at the wonderful Federation that's come from across the stars and bring us news of this strange planet called Earth." So that was, to me, it was aspirational. And then of course the Enterprise would encounter more sophisticated cultures as well, bigger spaceships, things that it was outpowered by and couldn't escape. And I always liked the idea that the humanity was sort of, we got off the bottom rung, but there were more rungs to go, and there were plenty of other civilizations and powers out there that had more capability than we did. You had the idea of the Enterprise being pitched against an adversary, and you didn't know whether or not that alien ship was going to be more potent than yours or not. And yet the ship was equipped with all sorts of stuff. So it had scanners which could, and I don't know how scanners work. Because they seem to have quite miraculous capabilities. I just scan for life forms. How? How does that work? What does it do? Is it like radar? What? Does it send out a pulse of something and it gathers information back somehow? What? How does it work? How can you scan for life forms? I want to know how it works. Scanners are, all sorts of questions that aren't answered as to how these things work. We're picking up an object 6 light years away. Really? That's really impressive. How do you manage to focus on it? All sorts of things that now go on my head. So scanner. And you had the idea of long range sensors and short range sensors, and things like that. And it's like, okay, well, that brought in some quite nice sort of tactical stuff, which I did enjoy. And the Enterprise, most Starfleet ships work like submarines, really, don't they? They're sort of in a sort of submarine-y type environment in space. That's how Star Trek sort of portrays it. You have to maneuver around. Your ship is relatively unmaneuverable. You have to turn to. Kirk seems to always have, and I don't quite know how the navigation on starships works in Star Trek. I assume they're using a sort of degree coordinate system, because they say things like change course to 143 Mark II. And so I'm kind of thinking, so is that 143 degrees relative to something, or is it 143 degrees relative to your current course? And what does the Mark II mean? Does that mean is that 0.2, or is that up and down 2 degrees? I don't know how it works. Maybe somebody can explain how it navigates. But it's always something Mark II, and then of course you have all the wonderful little things that have become part of Star Trek, like evasive manoeuvres. Whereas in the original series, I think it's literally just evasive maneuvers. So when you say evasive maneuvers, Sulu has to do something. I don't know, and the Enterprise usually banks to the left because that's the only special effect we have. Yes, so it's got that very naval, in fact, very US naval, I think, but with the ranks as well, captain, first officer, lieutenant, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how the navigation works, but I think Roddenberry was in the US Navy, or was he in the Air Force or something like that? So he's kind of got that armed forces feel to it. So Balance of Terror, which is basically a World War II submarine movie, yes. So that's quite a good early episode. Evasive maneuvers is basically yelling duck in space. Get us out of the way, that thing. Whereas, of course, when you get to Next Generation, they've got a bit more sophisticated, haven't they? They can do evasive maneuvers pattern alpha, which is presumably number one. And then there's pattern beta and gamma and all these other variations on evasive maneuvers. So you can do different evasive maneuvers in different directions. But there was that quite tense stuff. They did it well in Star Trek. It's the first show I remember where raised shields. You had shields which defended your ship against alien attack, and your shields were the sort of magical stuff that you could sort of put in between you and the opponent. But they only lasted so long. Shields are down to 72%. So. All this sort of stuff, how they worked is never really explained either. But you have to, for some reason, you couldn't have your shields up all the time. You had to raise shields, which gave you a window of vulnerability before, if somebody was going to attack you. And those things are quite quite interesting. And then of course you had the weapons, which are phasers and photon torpedoes, which are just fabulous names. And I think I'm right in saying that phasers were called phasers because the technical writers on the show pointed out that lasers couldn't do some of the things that they needed them to do. And everybody, they say basically, okay, lasers aren't very well known yet, but in a few years they will be, and everyone will know that lasers can't do what we're saying they can do, which will make our show look out of date. So why don't we call them something else? And so hence the name phaser. And quite how phasers work, I'm not quite sure, but they work very well. So that's quite good, and lots of little and a few other people tactical limitations. So you can't transport people through shield when your shields are up, which means that it's quite hard to rescue people in certain situations, which is good tension. That's using your technology lore to good effect, and your photon torpedoes had were slower and all those kind of things, and the phasers were the primary armament, but the photon torpedoes could get the job done and stuff, and sometimes the phasers didn't work, and exactly, and then the movies, the Wrath of Khan. I mean, that is a brilliant one, really loads of Shakespeare. Why everybody was so obsessed with Shakespeare in the 22nd century, but there was a lot of good stuff there, and a lot of memorable baddies. I mean, the Klingons. Nobody in the entire universe hasn't heard of the Klingons, because they're they've been watered down over the years, but they're still quite a good bad guy in the original series. But just that idea of getting a pretty competent spaceship. I mean, the Enterprise isn't so iconic a ship, I suppose, as perhaps something like the Millennium Falcon. Probably to most people, the Millennium Falcon is almost a character in its own right in Star Wars, whereas the Enterprise is more of a vessel for going somewhere. But if I had a choice, to go on any fictional spaceship, if let's say they were all real and I had a choice, which fictional spaceship would you go on? I would choose the Enterprise every single time, because to me it's the exploration. It's the ship that's going out there. It's basically look out into the galaxy. Let's go find out what's out there. That's the mission of the Enterprise, and that would excite me even today. And that whole boldly going. I know it says no man has gone before, and we have to modernise that now with no one and stuff. But that whole intro sequence. What are they going to find this week? And I know in my heart as I got older, I knew it was limited by sets and costs, and the writers and what could physically be done on stage. But as a younger person, what are they going to find out in the galaxy this week? That excitement is just brilliant stuff. Glenn says, I disagree. The Enterprise was a character. People cried more when the Enterprise was destroyed in the movies than we'd Spock. Well, actually, that's interesting. I don't remember. That's interesting, actually. Spock's death, I remember coming as a bit of a shock. But losing the Enterprise, what do people think? Because the Enterprise was destroyed, but it was sort of resurrected, wasn't it, in the Enterprise A, and it comes back. The loss of this vessel, with the round nacelles and things, to be replaced by the other one, that to me was a loss. I don't know. What do other people think of the destruction? That was the search for Spock, wasn't it? When they destroyed the ship, was that more emotional than Spock's death or not? What do you think? To me, the Enterprise is more. It's more a vehicle to empower the exploration than it is a character. I don't know. That's an interesting one, actually. It's a fondly remembered fictional starship. There we go. SBF4DH. In 1984, I was heartbroken the Enterprise was destroyed. So okay, well there you go. Interesting. I don't remember a strong emotional hit when the ship was lost. Maybe it was. I don't know. I just don't. I remember watching Star Trek 3. I remember talking to my dad about Spock more than the Enterprise. So interesting. Very sad, but nothing like Spock's death. So, I remember Spock's death quite clearly and going, but they've killed Spock. I suppose because he was my kind of first aspirational fictional character. And the Enterprise was a Constitution class. So the Enterprise was one of a line, wasn't it? It's funny how we're going to be attached to things like that. So I appreciate what you're saying, Glenn. I personally didn't feel it quite like. I remember the loss of the Liberator. That was a shock as well, wasn't it? I do remember that one as well. Blake 7 is a different subject, of course, which I might have to go and cover another day. But that's interesting. That's interesting. The loss of the ship itself. There were a lot of things about the Enterprise that I liked. Lots of things about the original series, and I think it's that boldly going into space stuff that kind of grabbed me from an early age. It's the first TV show that I remember having obviously the Enterprise went out to fight things. It did often do military stuff, but it wasn't primarily a military vehicle. Whereas, and you contrast that with Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and all those things. No, and I love the Galactica particularly from the original series, and I like the the ethos of Star Wars and the X-wings and all those kind of things. But the original, those ships are military ships. The X-wings, the Y-wings, Battlestar Galactica with its Vipers, they're all military ships. They're out there to fight. That's what they do. They're not primarily exploration ships. Whereas the Enterprise was more sort of an armed. Technically it was a Constellation class heavy cruiser, I think they called it. So again, more military description, but actually it wasn't really a military ship in many ways. It was obviously part of the United Federation of Planets Starfleet. And it was armed, but you get the impression the Enterprise was more kind of like a multi-purpose. If you took it into an Elite Dangerous context, it would be a multi-purpose ship capable of doing all sorts of stuff. Because it had arboretums on board, and it had a shuttle bay, and it had gardens, and it had a sick bay, and it had science labs where sciencey stuff was being done. Not quite sure what they were studying, but the Enterprise could do science out in space, and that's I think why I like it more than all the other ships. James Blythe. So yes, the novels. Yes, I did read the novels because James Blythe novelised them, didn't he? Way back. I remember getting them out of the library a number of times. The novels are actually I thought they were quite good. I quite like James Blythe or Bleach. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it was they're actually quite good. He's actually written some of his own science fiction as well, which is quite good stuff. There are a few errors in those books, but they're pretty old now. I don't know if you can get hold of them, the original novelizations anymore. But I do remember reading them years and years ago. I think they had to destroy the Enterprise because they bluffed the self-destruct mechanism so many times. They did a few times, didn't they? I will admit that when I first saw Star Trek Generations and the Enterprise D was destroyed, I didn't understand that the movie came after the show, and I wondered how that worked. The ship was already clearly intact in the show. Yeah, so actually I think the destruction of the Enterprise D came as more of a surprise to me than anything else, because and I suppose the special effects were that much better by that point, because it obviously crashed on the planet, which was pretty cool. This whole saucer section of the ship actually smashes down through the atmosphere and impacts on the ground, carving a massive great chasm. That was pretty good. I still have my copies of the James Blythe books. They were my dad's. Wow, okay. And he had to write them up from scripts before the show aired in the UK. I remember reading the forewords to those books, actually, and I can't remember much about them, but I do remember him, James Blythe, talking about the complexities of writing the story. So that's quite good. And I think he wrote a couple of extras, didn't he, that were not TV series. I think Spock is Dead or Spock Must Die or something like that. James Blythe was probably a bit of an unsung hero for Star Trek. But yes, I have read them. They're good, and they capture the feel of the show. So that, but that exploration, going out there to find out what's out there, that really appeals to me. I think that's the bit about Star Trek I like the most. And the episodes where they go out and do some science and discover things are always my favourite episodes. No, the Enterprise D, it's just too stubby for my liking. I don't like the design of the ship. I don't like the fact the saucer section isn't circular. I don't like the fact that the warp engines are below the saucer from the perspective of the ship. The ship just looks badly proportioned to me. I'm not a big fan of the Enterprise D design. Spock Must Die, says Silversteel, but yes, I remember that one. And his wife wrote Mud's Angels. Okay, that's interesting. So there's some good stuff. There's some good stuff in there, and Star Trek has left us with this amazing legacy of science fiction. But it's I suppose Star Trek has mostly been hampered by the episodic nature. That's the thing in storytelling which it hasn't got out of in many ways. Particularly in the early original series and the Next Generation. Voyager I quite enjoyed, because there you are stuck actually way out in the galaxy, and you've got to find your way back again. That appealed to me, although they didn't always come up with the most original plot ideas within the show. But I quite liked Voyager. Deep Space Nine, I must admit, I haven't watched, so I need to find some time to do that. Never remember a successful series whose mission statement was just to go where everyone went because we don't like surprises. It's just going to tool around the Federation worlds, and just drop off supplies. It's not a very interesting show, no. So that kind of thing. And I do remember the back in, must have been, presumably the late 80s, when the Next Generation was being mooted, basically saying, if they can't do that, they can't do Star Trek again. There's no way they'll be able to replace the original series or anything worth watching. And it seemed at the beginning that was going to be the case, but I actually warmed to the Next Generation surprisingly quickly and enjoyed it. And in many ways, the storytelling there was more sophisticated and better than the original series. But some of the stuff was still the same, it was good stuff. So I think they've given, on balance, Star Trek has given us a lot of stuff. It's not, it straddles an interesting boundary, because on one hand there is scientific accuracy in Star Trek, probably more so than a lot of space opera-y stuff like Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica, things like that. But there's also a lot of kind of fantasy contrivance in it as well, which renders it quite separate from, dare I say it, serious science fiction. But it does, and Star Trek is much more a storytelling vehicle to kind of take our, social things that we have in the real world and transport them into a sci-fi realm, so we can kind of pick at them and examine them differently. So an awful lot of Star Trek episodes were about, drugs or race or sexism or ageism or the Fountain of Youth or all these sorts of things. It was a sci-fi way of examining some of those sort of things. Battlestar Galactica is true history. All of this has happened before. All of this will happen again. There are a few funnies with TNG told us in the Star Trek universe people have forgotten how simple things work. Yes. Well, the thing that my dad was always highly amused about on Star Trek is he was an electronics engineer, so he knew quite a lot. He was able to he was an old school electronics engineer, and he was able to he could build a transformer from scratch. That's the sort of craftsmanship that he was brought up on. He would build electric components from first principles. He knew how to do it. And so I remember him looking at because it didn't happen on the original series quite so much, but particularly when the films came out, and when the ships got attacked, there was lots of smoke and battle damage on the bridge, and it happened in it began to happen in the Next Generation and in Voyager, much more. Is that when the ship gets hit by something, stuff catches fire on the bridge. Beams would fall down from the ceiling, and the entire deck would be littered with bits of debris. And I remember my dad watching I think I must have been at the cinema. I think I was watching. It was Wrath of Khan, and my dad had come along. He quite enjoyed it. But I remember him saying to me in the theatre, he said they could have avoided all that problem just by having a few circuit breakers. I remember thinking, damn Dad, you just spoiled that whole thing. I want it to be that there are explosive devices underneath all of the consoles for no obviously explicable reason, because there is no reason why a console, which is literally just a set of switches and maybe a few monitors, needs anything of desperately high voltage to work in the way it's sort of portrayed. There should be nothing in a console that isn't fused or circuit broken appropriately. So if it goes wrong, it can't cut out without terrifying electrical damage to anybody who might be using it. The idea that you're sitting at the console and you could receive a deadly electric shock seems a curious oversight to me in the design of the bridge on the Enterprise. So that's a problem. And I remember my dad saying, why is everything catching fire? That's really dangerous on a spaceship. You'd have much better fire suppression systems. So my dad was always picking holes and things, but he did like the fact that the warp drive was a warp drive, because he talked to me about black holes and all those sort of things. Trying to make sure operators didn't make mistakes. So there are a few things like that. It's like why, the camera lurches where it's like, oh, the ship is banking to starboard, and no seat. What happened to seatbelts? Okay, you're sitting on a ship, and evidence has shown you that every so often, no matter how good your inertia dampeners or whatever technology that is that you're employing are, your ship can receive jolts. So we have technology to deal with that. They're called seatbelts. There aren't any seatbelts on the Enterprise for some reason, and in fact, in some of the chairs on the bridge, I think I'm right in saying, don't seem to even be attached to the floor sometimes. It strikes me as extremely dangerous. Everything should be bolted down to the bulkhead. Don't get me started on the Spore drive from the new series. I haven't forgiven them for that. I couldn't get past the first season, so I've been told that the next season of Star Trek, well, if it's called Star Trek Discovery, is actually better, but that first season I genuinely didn't like. I thought it was bad writing, apart from a few bits and pieces on one of the episodes. Ridiculous Spore drive. I thought that was just the silliest thing I've ever seen in a TV series. And I just didn't think it was Trek for me. I mean, so I need to maybe give season 2 a try, but but that was all sorts of silly stuff. You don't need OP technology like that. It's not that's what Star Trek is. So That's not good. But yeah, the number of people killed by exploding consoles in Star Trek is huge. It's an extremely dangerous place, and that's before you get to things like the red shirts and all those sort of problems. Oh yeah, and the step down, step up the bridge. That's very it's just asking for sprained ankles, isn't it? Yeah, and the Klingons in the original series aren't great, are they? They're sort of slightly bronzed faces and Fu Manchu sort of moustaches. That's not great by modern standards either. But I do like this. The other thing that is good about the original series is the idea of having the view screen at the front of the ship, which appears to be some sort of holographic sort of TV monitor type thing, the way it works. And I always used to like the little light that was at the bottom. You remember there was a little light that kind of just went along the bottom of the screen, sort of flickering. It was a bit like a sort of Knight Rider, but only in one direction. It would go as if it was doing something important. There were loads of lights on the Enterprise. In fact, that was a real staple of science fiction. Is to have a lot of lights. Computers were characterised by not actually having much in the way of information screens, but having a lot of lights that would flash on and off in extremely, authoritative and informative sequences that only only people who really know them could actually interpret. And what I did like is that when the computers were having to work hard, the lights would flash in much faster sequences. So you'd hear this sort of chuntery kind of noise, and the lights would flash really, really quickly, and then the computer would go, the answer is 2 planets have been detected in sensor range. That sort of weird computer voice, which is obviously very similar to Alexa. If you had an Alexa with a few flashy lights on it, it would be identical to Star Trek. And in fact, I've got my Alexa. You will not be surprised to know this. I have an Alexa in my house, and I've set it so it responds to computer rather than Alexa. So I can say, computer. All I wish it would do, and I can't make it do it, I wish it would respond with working. But it doesn't. Working. All those. Wouldn't it be really distracting to have loads of lights flickering up and down on your monitor? Not good at all. The other thing I never got over on, and they didn't solve it in the Next Generation or in Deep Space Nine, is that all of their handheld scanner things, and particularly the medical ones, have flashing lights on them, but don't seem to have any readouts. So you can kind of hold this thing, which looks like a salt cellar. I've actually got something that looks quite similar to one here. This is actually a temperature sensor for a Seat Arosa, which is my youngest son's car. Looks like that. It's actually green, which means it's slightly transparent in this light. It's quite similar to a Star Trek scanner. And what you do is you hold it by your patient's head. Hold it like this while there's this sort of sound going on, and then you hold it away and you look at it and you go, yes, he's got Parkinson's disease. It's like, what are you looking at to make that diagnosis? It's just a. And even in the Next Generation, they have little LED lights in them, and they spin around, authoritatively, and just go, yes, it's a neocortical stimulator is what's required. How did you work that out? And they have diagnostic tools which do the same. They're like measuring sticks with lights on, and it's like, but there's no readout. How are you doing your diagnosis? Oh dear. You can do computer working with voice attack. Oh, excellent. So 99% of Star Trek overloads were caused by the power draw. Yeah, so it's quite funny. They didn't have sophisticated LCD screens in their tech, so they were copying that. Everything was communicated with simple sounds. Yeah, I suppose that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? But maybe McCoy memorised a numerical code that comes at 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a couple of occasions in Star Trek you see a mechanical clock ticking round, because that's the only technology they had. But yeah, I suppose Doctor Who did that with the sonic screwdriver as well. That just could do anything. But I mean, at least the tricorders had some limitations. They didn't always work, and they could only scan certain things. They did sometimes have a box. Yeah, I suppose they did. They held the one thing up and they were looking at the tricorder, weren't they? So maybe that's how they used it. But the idea was quite sound. The other thing I was always impressed by with the Next Generation ones is when you tap your communicator, the communicator knows when you're speaking to somebody else in advance of you saying their name. So it's like you tap it and you go, Picard to Riker. The computer has to. There's never a pause in the conversation where you get a little acknowledgement from the communicator that there's a connection has been established. It's just it's assumed it's working. So Bluetooth before Bluetooth was done. So, but there's some clever stuff in there. Oh yeah, and the tricorders had a little black and white TV screen, didn't they? That's right. Yes, I do remember that. That was quite cool. So some clever ideas in that sort of thing. Fond memories of Star Trek for those kind of things. I think. So I mean, if you look at it in terms of overall contribution, you've got good characterization. You got a ship that is definitely, if not a character, maybe it is a character in the story. I'll give you that, Glenn. Definitely a huge part of the the story is actually the vessel itself. You get attached to the vessel. Lots of technology, lots of sort of tactical arrangements, lots of memorable alien races, and that whole exploration concept of going boldly where no one's gone before. Just like that sort of stuff. And I suppose Star Trek also, kind of just summing up in some ways, the thing I do like about Star Trek, and a lot of people don't like this, but the one thing I do like about Star Trek is it's actually an optimistic future for us. Not just, we survived the alien invasion, or we defeated the bad guys, or, the machines didn't get the better of us, which you get from Battlestar and Star Wars and virtually every alien invasion film there's ever been. Whereas in this, the Federation is presented as an actually not a perfect society, but certainly a society that's more utopian than anything we have on Earth today. It is something for us to aspire to. I think here's we've got our act together on the Earth and we've gone out into space as a united humanity. And along the way, we've incorporated aliens into our mix as well, so they can just wander around on our ships and do stuff with us. That I think is actually a very, very positive message. And I've always liked that about Star Trek, that it's kind of, humanity, yes, we've got problems, but we can overcome them. We can become better. We can become more cohesive. We can become more accepting. We become all those sort of things. So I think, that to me is actually a really, really good message that, more and more more relevant nowadays than perhaps ever was. They have gone away from that, haven't they? I think that's a very good point, actually, Gian. If you look at Picard and you look at Discovery, it's much more doom and gloom again. So all that sort of stuff. The business with the in the Discovery with the Klingon abuse, I suppose, of one. I can't remember what. I remember watching it and thinking, is this what we want Trek to be? All that sort of stuff, and post-traumatic stress disorders and all those kind of things. I don't mind them engaging with social issues at the time. There was obviously they're quite a strong kind of LBGTQD. What I think it's not quite sure what the letters are now. I haven't got a problem with that. I think that's exactly the sort of thing that Star Trek should be talking about. But the very dystopian nature of everything, and the fact that actually everyone in the Star Trek universe is actually not very. That's not really Star Trek's message to my thing. Star Trek was always about bettering ourselves, even if it got a little bit too conference roomy for a while on the Next Generation. The invasion is coming. Well, I'll tell you what, let's go to the ready room and let's talk it out. There's quite a lot of that. But Star Trek's always been about talking about social issues. That's kind of what Star Trek is, So there was always stuff like that in it. I think that's perfectly acceptable for Star Trek. But I think the tone, where, like you say, where it gets all dystopian and slightly depressing. Star Trek was never depressing. Star Trek was aspirational, I don't know. Or maybe that's just a sign of the times, because the original Battlestar Galactica was I suppose if you look at it, it's basically still it's arguably a war film, but the original Battlestar Galactica, the first episode is actually slightly is quite the feature length bit of Battlestar Galactica, the original series, is quite poignant because you've got the 12 colonies are destroyed, the survivors have to get together, they can't take everyone with them. Some people are left behind to be killed by the Cylons, and then the ragtag fugitive fleet is out there trying to get away from the Cylons. But after that, the show's mood lifted quite noticeably. I mean, you've got poor I can't remember the lady who got killed early on, but Apollo's wife, anyway, mother of Boxey, whatever her name was. She died. That was quite sad. But then it all became exploration again. The quest for the shining planet known as Earth, and it became a bit more optimistic. Whereas, of course, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica is much more kind of military and probably gritty and more realistic, but doesn't have that. I suppose maybe innocence. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. The optimism is missing from a lot of science fiction today. Maybe that's just where we are. So it gives me ideas. I've been planning a space opera-y, science fiction-y book series for quite a while because I did get a bit frustrated with my elite writing in the sense I couldn't do everything that I wanted to do. I liked doing my Shadewood, but that was more, although that wasn't really fantasy, it was more fantasy than it was science in the sense of the way the stories developed. But I'd like to do a pure spacey series of novels, but unconstrained by somebody else's law. So I'm kind of looking forward to doing that. But I don't know what to sort of do in terms of do I do more kind of classic soap opera-y sort of thing, or do I do a voyage of exploration on the starship, or what? All those kind of things. There is something to be said for that sort of youthful optimism that we had in some of the old TV shows. Like, I mean, as somebody's mentioned there, Buck Rogers and Tweaky. I liked Buck Rogers because it was always a case of, that sort of plucky hero adventure story. Things come good in the end, kind of A-Team almost esque thing. But it can get old, and I suppose it did, and that's why we have different shows today. But sometimes I find the modern stuff is so overwritten. The characters are so obtuse, or they're so complicated that you can't really figure out what's going on. They're complicated to the point where they're almost impenetrable in terms of their motivations. I find that a bit of a turn-off for modern writing. So bring back the optimistic space opera. I think there's a place for it again. I think we need to be more optimistic because, but yeah, no, I will get. I'm almost at the end of Doom Dark's Revenge now, so I do want to spend some time thinking about my space opera sci-fi epic, which I want to do next. But yeah, Buck Rogers I have a fond place for. Battlestar Galactica I really liked. But again, those computers with lots of flashing lights were everywhere on those. But I did the Battlestar Galactica, the Galactica, I quite liked as a ship because it was thought through from a perspective of a battleship. With launching its weapons, it was sort of an aircraft carrier in space, really, wasn't it? That to me had some thinking about it, and I liked the fact that the ship could, take quite a pounding, although it took the same pounding every week, because the special effects budget was limited and they had to reuse the shots over and over again. But it was it was a plucky ship, the Galactica. I always quite liked it. So all those kind of things, and that optimistic nature is something that we're missing now. Most of our shows are quite things go wrong and people die, and it's kind of like you just nowadays, ever since sort of George R.R. Martin, you have to kill people. And I know Star Trek had its share of death as well, but we didn't labour the point. Well, the red shirts died, but the main characters are still okay. So Cylons with Knight Rider gone bad. Just look at the same flashing lights. Yes, right. It's the same AI, isn't it? All that kind of stuff. So maybe there's a place for more optimistic sci-fi. But Star Trek, I feel, has given me a lot. My life would be very much poorer if it were not for Star Trek. And on Captain Kirk's 90th birthday, I think it's only fair that we raise a glass, metaphorically speaking. Maybe Romulan ale. Let's have a glass of Romulan ale in memory of Trek, because the world would be a poorer place without Star Trek, particularly the original series, and I think the Next Generation. Some groundbreaking stuff, and also I suppose making science fiction a bit more accessible to your average person in the street. There's nobody in the world that doesn't know what "Beam me up, Scotty" means, even though Kirk never actually said it. Ahead warp factor 2 and all those sort of things. It's all fantastic, a massive part of our culture, which I think is an important thing. So hats off, and happy 90th birthday to William Shatner, and many happy returns of the day to you, sir. We salute you for being the captain of the Enterprise for all those years. But anyway, so back on Thursday, obviously, with more Elite Dangerous stuff. Saturday continues our exploration of all things Frontier, and we can carry on doing all those sort of things. But anyway, so apologies for the outage in the middle. I'll try and stitch that up together for the YouTube so it looks totally and utterly seamless. It's not. And we will carry on with our science fiction and fantasy discussions, obviously, on the Monday evening. So there will be a bit of a break coming up. I'm going to take the week around Easter off. I generally have a kind of digital detox around the big holidays, so there might be a week or so gap there. But I will once I figure out what it is, I'll obviously let you know. Yes, and Glenn's quite right. 9 Streams of Consciousness. There will be an episode devoted to 9 Streams of Consciousness where we sort of sum up the year and go around on that kind of stuff as well. So to talk about the book that we published here on this stream a year ago. So that would be quite good fun too. Right, my friends, you have a fantastic week. Look after yourselves in this crazy world. Be optimistic. And use your favorite sci-fi show to take you to good places where no one's been before. and boldly go. So be bold, boldly go, and split infinitives and stuff. But anyway, you take care of yourselves, my friends. I will see you on. And anyway, don't say right on, commanders. What do we just write on? There we go. Right, just keep writing on. That's what we say. Take care, my friends, and I will see you soon. There we go. I'm such a child. Take care now. Bye bye.